Today's guest is Marina Hritsyshyna, a Ukrainian-born hydrogen policy expert working at the heart of Europe's energy transition. Based in Germany and pursuing a PhD in Finland, she's shaping the regulatory future of clean hydrogen. Marina has her own podcast called Clean Energy Talks. Check it out on YouTube. On today's episode, we dive deep into the EU versus US policy, aviation fuels, and what inspires her in this fast-moving sector. Let's go. Marina, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Peter. What was the invitation or possibility to discuss with you interesting topic?
Very good. I'm so happy to have you because you bring a unique perspective. And what I want to talk about today mostly is hydrogen. You're based in Germany and have a policy perspective. I know you're getting your PhD, but tell us to start with, how did you first get into hydrogen?
So my first, meeting with the topic was in 2020 when I started my course about natural gas regulation in foreign school regulation. It's one of the most famous school in regulatory framework in the EU. And instead of natural gas, we discussed and studied a lot of topics connected with renewable or green hydrogen. And later I had some projects in Ukraine connected with drafting some regulations connected with certification of renewable hydrogen. However, the close work with this topic was from 2022 when I relocated to Germany in March of this year. And since April 2022, I work in hydrogen sector of Germany.
Very good. I'm curious. So you were hearing about natural gas and then hydrogen comes into the mix. What piqued your interest about hydrogen? What made you, what was appealing about it to you?
So frankly speaking, I decided to work in hydrogen sector in March 2022 in Germany because when I arrived from Ukraine in this very difficult period and crisis, I understood that I need to find a job in Germany. But I was not sure that I will be competitive in renewable energy sector where I had a very good experience in Ukraine, but in Germany, I didn't have any experience. So for this reason, I decided that hydrogen is the perfect sector for me because it's a new one, it's interesting, it's renewable, and it's connected with energy sector. And starting from April, I was inspired to working with hydrogen sector because I found a lot of interesting topics, and I see the development of this sector each year, each month, development of technology and regulation. So I'm still inspired with this, and at the same time, I think we have a lot of changes in regulation in energy sector next years.
For sure. And I think you touched on a great word there which is inspired, right? With new technology, we really need an inspiration. Not everything is perfect. It's all has to be developed. And I think government regulation plays a key role. Could you talk a little about some regulation that's in Europe that you have found to be effective, maybe in helping the industry develop?
Well, frankly speaking, the EU regulation is extremely complicated. It's clear for all policymakers also, they raise this topic, and I hope that we will have some changes. At the same time, this regulation is important, and we have in place the regulation for renewable hydrogen or green hydrogen in the EU. This regulation is important in order to understand the main rules for hydrogen production. These rules are important for investors, for other market participants, stakeholders. However, as I mentioned, it's still very challenging to comply with all these rules, and we expect for some simplification in the future.
It is a challenge. And the same thing, I think, in the US with the Inflation Reduction Act was fairly complicated. We did have a production tax credit, which is good. Of course, that's in flux. Do you have any thoughts around production tax credit to help create supply as an effective means of policy regulation?
I analyzed the IRA and the 45 tax credit, and it seems to me that it's a very interesting approach because due to tax credit, you try to cover the gap between hydrogen production cost and market price that is lower than production cost. It's a very good approach because it will be applied to all hydrogen produced as green, as renewable. Second advantage that you have certain life cycle emission calculation that you have in grid and you publish like Excel table where each person can just put information and to check the project. It's very, I think, useful approach for planning the project. In comparison, in the EU, we have rules, but we need to find the service provider who will check the project to perform audit in this project. So it's more complicated in comparison that I understood you have in the US. But the main questions, was it possible to apply IRA for the future projects in the US?
For sure. I see exactly what you're talking about because the price of gray hydrogen is very low and the cost to produce green hydrogen is very high. And so in the IRA, I think it was about $3 per kilogram production tax credit. From our perspective, it was not big enough. The $3 should have been bigger in order to cover the true cost, but I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, $3 per kilogram hydrogen looks not so high in comparison with the prices in the EU. I share last time 8-10 euro per hydrogen, per renewable hydrogen. And it's the real problem with such high prices, so it's important to find some policy instruments in order to cover this gap between the possible price on the market and costs for production. So in the EU, we use different instruments. Like Hydrogen Bank, we have a lot of targets for development of the demand, quotas on the national level. We have H2 Global option. Just last week, it was announced. At the same time, there is a lot of questions.
Yeah, that's very true. So gray hydrogen is reasonable. It doesn't cost so much to produce. Of course, it has emissions. What are some applications of gray hydrogen or uses of hydrogen that you see where they're using it today?
Understand now the most of hydrogen that is produced is gray hydrogen, and we still have certain industries where we use it in chemical industries. But at the
Yeah, we
same
see it
time,
in refineries a lot.
refineries, yes. So, but our target is to exclude and to use low carbon hydrogen or renewable in the EU.
Does the EU consider blue hydrogen with carbon capture? Do they consider that a viable hydrogen, or does it have to be produced by renewables, wind and solar?
So in general, now we consider blue hydrogen, we call it low carbon hydrogen. The main requirements for this hydrogen is emissions threshold, 3.4 kilogram CO2 emission per kilogram of hydrogen. We can produce such hydrogen not only from natural gas, but also from using nuclear electricity, for instance, like an option. However, if we consider targets for demand, most of targets according to renewable energy directive are based on use of renewable hydrogen. Only exceptions that I can mention, I think, for instance, refuel EU aviation regulation with required share of the use of sustainable aviation fuel and including ESAF. And in this regulation, we have mentioned about possibility to use low carbon fuels based on hydrogen. However, at the same time, it is based on the nuclear electricity. Correct, I remember.
Yeah. So aviation is an interesting application, I think. Can you point to any cases or uses of hydrogen in the aviation industry in the EU where you feel like it's been done effectively or maybe will be in the next, call it 5 or 10 years?
So we have called this refuel EU aviation regulation now in place in the EU, and this regulation works from January this year. And all aircraft operators are obliged to use 2% of SAF in their fueling of crafts. We have obligations for aviation fuel supply to supply fuel for aircraft operators with 2% of SAF, sustainable aviation fuel. And from 2030, we expect also certain quotas for SAF fuel produced using renewable hydrogen or RFNBO, also called in the EU. However, this requirements is very challenging because it's important to comply with this 2% of SAF in each large airports, and at the same time, the production of SAF is not concentrated near each airport. So, for this reason, we have some publications from the European Commission guidehouse about possible auctions for self-flexibility mechanism according to the regulation, and other topics like book and claim system and a lot of other questions.
Now, the book and claim is a very interesting topic. Let's jump a little into you. You're in Germany, and I hear you're studying for your PhD. Tell me about that. What are you studying, and how is it in Germany these days? I think you're in near Bavaria, Nuremberg.
Yes, I live in Germany, but initially I was arrived from Ukraine, and I started my PhD in Finland 2 months ago. The main reason is that in Finland I found the best supervisors for me. They organized a center for analysis of hydrogen regulation in the University of Eastern Finland, and on the basis of this center, they have a lot of studies, different events where they discuss topics connected with hydrogen regulation.
Very good. And what's it like living in Bavaria? I haven't been over there in quite a while, but it's beautiful. I did the romantic road, and it's a fun place to be.
Yes, it's one of the more beautiful places for me in Germany. Except English, I studied German, and 1 year ago I completed my master degree in German law and EU law in local university. However, according to the German law, I cannot work as a lawyer, but still I had a possibility to study as foreign student in this university. And in general, I think Bavaria is one of the centers developed hydrogen economy in Germany because there is a lot of different companies that develop this technology, and FAO also has the Center of Politics. And 1 year ago, I worked also in company Hritsyshyna that is located in Netherlands and where I did now. And this company also develops LHC technology, liquid organic hydrogen carrier, for hydrogen transportation.
No, very good. And I noticed your LinkedIn profile says open to network. So tell us what you're open for networking in.
Yes, due to the termination of my contract in the nearest time, I am looking for new opportunities in the hydrogen sector in Germany. I specialize in regulation of hydrogen, politics, technologies, renewables, CO2 as a new commodity for e-fuel production, and of course the fuels. So I hope to find some options for me for professional development and for work with hydrogen topics. That is my inspiration latest years.
No, that's great. And would you consider working in the US, or do you want to stay in Europe?
I'm looking for opportunities for work in the US in connection with my PhD because I plan to analyze the regulation in the EU and in the US because I think it's very important to understand regulation for clean technologies from both perspectives. US and EU have different approaches, but at the same time, they have a lot of advantages that it's important to understand. I hope that I will have such opportunities.
Absolutely. And just to restate what you said, you have a law degree in addition to the PhD that you're getting. And I'm sure the law degree comes in handy when evaluating regulation, even if you're not a practicing attorney. I think a law degree is great.
Yes, it helps a lot because so regulation means that I need to understand all issues connected with drafting of this rules, how to propose amendments. You need participation in public consultation with the law degree is not so complicated because it's clear which option we can discuss with policymakers.
Very good. And I feel like having that law degree gives you a command of language and legal that you may not get just with the technical aspect as well. Have you seen that?
So, on the one hand, the law degree is useful, and I worked as a lawyer in Ukraine more than 12 years. I don't know how long. However, at the same time, I work more than 12 years in energy sector with technical topics. And in my work, I try to cooperate, to work with experts in technical issues because just knowledge of law without understanding of technology is not possible. And especially, for instance, politics technologies, quite difficult. It's not only supply of commodity like hydrogen or CO2, it's also chemical process that it's important to understand through all the chain, supply chain, through all process, how it works and what we receive at the end, and how we can use this product in the end, how certify this product, accept certification. We have standards, international standards for fuels, for instance. So it's interesting, but it's also very complicated.
For sure. Yeah, we call that a talent stack. When you have multiple talents you put together, you make yourself a lot more useful. And if you just are an expert in one area, you've got multiple areas. So, where do you think we're going to see you in the future? If you had to bet on where you're going to land in your next position, is it US? Is it Europe? Is it Asia? Where do you think you'll be?
I don't know. I'm just on the beginning of my search of new opportunities, and so I hope that I will find the best option.
We hope you end up in the US because we need a lot more smart people that know what they're doing over here, especially when it comes to new technology. So we're rooting for you to end up in the US. Look at Texas. We're always on this show, we're always talking about how fast Texas is growing and what a great place it is for the energy business.
Yes, I agree that you have a lot of interesting possibilities.
So, last question, you've got a podcast as well. Can you tell us a little about that?
Yeah, I think it's mostly a similar approach as you have. I think it's a very good option for shares with audience and interesting topics. My podcast calls Clean Energy Talks. I invite experts from clean energy industry, mostly from hydrogen. We discuss one specific topic with 5 or 6 questions during 20 minutes. And the main idea of this podcast to introduce other experts to my audience in LinkedIn, to my friends and colleagues, and to understand important topics in clean energy world from perspective of these experts. And I enjoyed a lot this podcast because such discussions are very insightful for me. I can find some interesting topics, interesting information that is useful for understanding the hydrogen economy.
Very good. Well, from one host to another, it's a lot easier being the host than being the guest because it's easier to ask questions than to answer. But you did an amazing job today, Marina. It's been great having you on. Tell the audience where they can find you on LinkedIn. Just say your full name and can they get in touch with you and maybe be on the show?
So my name is Marina Hritsyshyna, and you can follow me on LinkedIn or send the contact request. I accept almost all.
Almost all. Yeah, I'm the same. I always caveat almost all because there are some interesting requests that don't look legitimate, but accept almost all.
I say almost all because sometimes it's a new profile without any contacts. It means that it's maybe not correct.
It's like a bot or something. I see it all the time. So, but I do like LinkedIn as a platform, and I noticed that you have a big following on there. So, Marina, it's been a pleasure having you on Energy Superheroes.
Thank you very much for the invitation.